Maybe that's why what happened next was always meant to happen. Maybe the universe was just waiting for the right moment to reward someone who never stopped caring, even when caring hurt. That's when he walked in. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, and Sarah looked up to see a man who didn't belong in a place like Mel's. He was elderly, maybe 70, with silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. His coat was expensive, the kind that cost more than Sarah made in 3 months, and everything about him spoke of money and refinement. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were kind, the sort of gentle brown that reminded her of her grandfather, and they held a weight that Sarah recognized immediately. This was a man who had known loss, real loss, the kind that changes you forever. He chose the corner booth, the one with the best view of the entire diner, and sat down with the careful movements of someone who had learned to be patient with time. Sarah approached with her usual professional smile, notepad ready, expecting another quick order and minimal interaction. "Just coffee and whatever pie you'd recommend," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd traveled far from home. His hands rested on the table, and Sarah noticed they were weathered but gentle, with calluses that spoke of honest work despite the expensive watch that caught the light. These weren't the soft hands of someone who'd never struggled. As Sarah poured his coffee, she felt something strange. He was watching her, but not in the creepy way she'd grown accustomed to from late-night customers. He was studying her like he was trying to solve a puzzle, like she was important somehow. It made her uncomfortable and curious all at once. "You work here long?" he asked as she set down his slice of cherry pie. The diner became her second home, though it felt more like a prison. She knew every stain on every table, every crack in the vinyl booths, every face that walked through that door at 3 in the morning looking for something they'd never find in a cup of coffee. Sarah had mastered the art of the fake smile, the one that said, "I care about your problems," when really she was calculating how much she needed in tips to keep the lights on for another month. Picture this. It's late October, and the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. The clock on the diner wall reads 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Sarah is living her nightmare on repeat. Serve coffee to the truck driver who never tips. Clear the table where the teenage couple just had their breakup fight. Smile at the lonely businessman who orders pie he'll never finish. Same faces, same orders, same dead-end life, Sarah thought as she wiped down the counter for the 100th time that night. The coffee pot gurgled like it was drowning, and honestly, Sarah knew exactly how it felt. She'd been drowning for years, just slow enough that nobody noticed, just fast enough that she could feel herself going under. But here's what you need to understand about Sarah. Beneath all that exhaustion and cynicism, there was still a spark of the person she used to be. When Mrs. Henderson from Table 6 couldn't afford her usual slice of apple pie, Sarah would slip it to her anyway and mark it as damaged goods on the receipt. When young Tommy came in after his night shift at the factory, looking like he hadn't eaten in days, Sarah would accidentally make too much food and offer it to him for free. The other waitresses called her soft. The manager said she was too generous for her own good. But Sarah couldn't help it. Even when life had beaten her down, even when she barely had enough for herself and Emma, she still saw people's pain and wanted to fix it. What if I told you that a single act of kindness from a stranger could completely transform someone's life forever? Tonight, you'll discover how one mysterious customer walked into Sarah's diner and left behind something that would change everything she thought she knew about hope, destiny, and second chances. Before we dive into this incredible true story, make sure to hit that like button if you believe in the power of human kindness, and subscribe with notifications on because stories like this remind us why we should never give up on people. Now let's begin. Let me tell you about Sarah Martinez. At 34, she had the kind of tired eyes that come from working double shifts and sleepless nights. For 8 long years she'd been serving coffee and dreams at Mel's all-night diner, a place where hope went to die and the fluorescent lights buzzed like broken promises. Sarah wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, she had dreams bigger than the small industrial town that seemed to swallow people whole. She wanted to be a chef, to create something beautiful with her hands, to make people smile with every bite. But life had other plans. When her husband walked out 3 years ago, leaving her with their 12-year-old daughter Emma and a mountain of debt, those dreams got buried under the weight of survival. Every morning, Sarah would look at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror of their tiny apartment and wonder how she'd become this person. The rent was always 2 weeks behind, her car made sounds that shouldn't come from any machine built to last, and Emma's school shoes had holes that duct tape couldn't fix anymore. But Sarah kept going because that's what mothers do. They keep going even when everything inside them wants to break. "Sarah," Robert said gently, but she was already moving, grabbing her order pad from the table, retreating behind the counter where she felt safe. "I need to get back to work," she said, her voice brittle as glass. "Thanks for the coffee and the story. But I'm not your daughter. I'm not your second chance. I'm just a waitress who's gotten really good at pretending everything's fine." She turned her back to him and began furiously wiping down the already clean counter, her movements sharp and desperate. In the reflection of the coffee machine, she could see Robert still sitting there, still waiting, the envelope still on the table between them like a bridge she was too scared to cross. Because what if it was real? What if, for once in her life, something beautiful was actually possible? The thought terrified her more than any eviction notice ever could. As Sarah scrubbed the same spot on the counter for the 3rd time, her mind became a battlefield where hope and fear waged war against each other. She could feel Robert's presence behind her, patient and unwavering, but she couldn't bring herself to turn around. Instead, she let her thoughts drift back to a time when dreams felt possible. She was 22 again, standing in her tiny first apartment kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she practiced making pasta from scratch. Her husband David would come home from work to find their kitchen table covered with experimental dishes. Herb-crusted salmon, homemade ravioli, chocolate soufflés that sometimes fell but always tasted like love. "You're going to be famous someday," he'd say, kissing her cheek as he tasted her latest creation. "People are going to wait in line just to eat your food." The memory hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time she'd cooked something beautiful? When was the last time she'd felt that spark of creativity that used to make her stay up until 3 in the morning perfecting a sauce? "But if I can honor her memory by helping you achieve what she never could, then maybe I can finally sleep at night." The weight of his words, his loss, his desperate need to find meaning in tragedy, settled over Sarah like a warm coat on a cold night. This wasn't charity. This was resurrection. His daughter's dreams living again through someone who understood what it meant to create love with your hands. But Sarah's mind couldn't accept what her heart was screaming at her to believe. She pushed the envelope back across the table with trembling fingers, shaking her head so violently that her ponytail whipped across her shoulders. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, this is insane. This is some kind of scam, right? Some sick joke." She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the linoleum floor, the sound echoing through the nearly empty diner like a gunshot. Robert didn't move, didn't try to convince her. He just sat there with those patient, understanding eyes, watching her fall apart with the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly how this story needed to end. "People like you don't just walk into places like this and change people's lives," Sarah continued, her voice rising with each word. "Good things don't happen to people like me. I'm a 34-year-old waitress with a broken car, and a daughter who's outgrown her shoes. I'm nobody special. The words tasted like poison in her mouth because part of her had always believed them. Life had taught her to expect disappointment, to brace for the moment when hope would inevitably crumble into dust. Every promise her ex-husband had made and broken, every dream she'd had to sacrifice, every night she'd fallen asleep wondering if tomorrow would finally be the day she couldn't keep going. It all came rushing back in a wave of self-doubt that threatened to drown her. Robert reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a manila envelope that looked official and intimidating. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as he placed it on the table next to his half-eaten pie, the paper somehow more terrifying than any eviction notice she'd ever received. "Inside this envelope," Robert said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "is a cashier's check for $50,000. It's yours, Sarah. All of it. Enough to pay off your debts, fix your car, catch up on rent, and still have money left over to enroll in the best culinary school in the state." Sarah's vision blurred. $50,000. It might as well have been 50 million. She'd never seen that much money in her entire life, let alone held it in her hands. "I don't understand. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Robert said, leaning forward with an intensity that made Sarah's skin tingle. "I know you've been working double shifts for 8 years to keep food on the table for your daughter. I know you still slip free meals to people who can't afford them, even when you can barely afford your own groceries. I know you haven't given up on your dreams. You've just buried them so deep you've forgotten they're still breathing." He pushed the envelope closer to her, and Sarah stared at it like it might explode. "There's only one condition. When you succeed, and you will succeed, I want you to find someone else who needs what you needed tonight. Someone whose dreams are drowning in their circumstances. Someone who deserves a second chance but has no way to take it." Sarah's hand shook as she touched the edge of the envelope. "This is insane. People don't just give away money to strangers. They do when they have nothing left to lose," Robert said softly. "Sarah, I'm 73 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and none of it means anything without grace." "This is grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm Robert Chen. I used to own a chain of restaurants before I retired. Before I lost the only thing that mattered." Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind reeling. The resemblance was uncanny. Not just physical but something deeper. The joy in Grace's eyes, the way she held herself. Even the flower stains on her apron spoke of someone who found purpose in creating something beautiful for others. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, though part of her was beginning to. Robert's hand shook slightly as he put the photograph away. "After Grace died, I couldn't bear to be around food anymore. I sold everything, gave most of the money away, kept just enough to live comfortably. But I couldn't find peace. Every night, I'd dream about her restaurant that would never exist, about all the people who would never taste her food or feel the warmth she wanted to create." He paused, watching Sarah's face carefully. "Then I realized something. Grace's dream didn't have to die with her. It could live on through someone else. Someone who shared her heart, her vision, her desperate need to nurture others." Sarah's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down, her hands trembling. "You've been coming to diners looking for someone like her." "Not just someone like her," Robert said, his voice gaining strength. "Someone who was her. In spirit, in purpose, in the way they see food as love made visible. I've been searching for months, visiting places like this in different towns, watching, waiting. And then I found you." The fluorescent lights above them flickered, casting shadows that danced across Robert's weathered face. "Sarah, I want to give you what Grace never got the chance to have. I want to give you back your dreams." The words hung in the air between them like a promise too beautiful to believe, too dangerous to ignore. Sarah's breath caught. There was something in the way he said it, the careful control in his voice, that told her this wasn't just a fond memory. This was a wound that had never healed. She wanted to open her own restaurant, he continued, his weathered hands wrapping around the coffee cup like it could anchor him to the present. Had it all planned out. The menu, the decor, even the name, Grace's Garden. She said she wanted to create a place where people could come and feel like they belonged. The tears Sarah had been fighting finally spilled over. What happened to her? Car accident. 5 years ago next month. The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water. She was 34. Your age. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. This wasn't coincidence. This was something else entirely, something that made her skin prickle with recognition. Why are you telling me this? The man looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. Because I've been coming to places like this for months, looking for someone who reminded me of her. Someone who still believed in the power of feeding people's souls, not just their bodies. Someone who deserved a second chance at their dreams. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. You've been watching me. For 3 weeks, he admitted without shame. I've seen you give away more free meals than you can afford. I've watched you comfort crying customers and celebrate with the happy ones. You're exactly who Grace would have wanted me to find. The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a blanket she wasn't sure she wanted to accept. Sarah's world tilted on its axis as the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a photograph that he placed gently on the table between them. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, wearing a chef's apron and laughing at something off camera. She could have been Sarah's sister. I just do my job, she replied, her voice flat and professional. I'm sure you do more than that, he said gently. Tell me, what did you want to be when you were younger? Before life got in the way. The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Nobody had asked her about her dreams in years. Even Emma had stopped asking why Mommy didn't cook the fancy meals she used to make. Dreams don't pay bills, mister, Sarah shot back, the bitterness in her voice surprising even her. But the man didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled with a sadness that seemed to reach across the table and touch something deep in Sarah's chest. You wanted to be a chef, he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. How did you? The way you arranged my pie. The way you made sure Mrs. Henderson got her slice even though she couldn't pay. The way you talk about food like it's more than just sustenance. He paused, studying her face. I used to know someone just like you. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt tears threatening to spill. This stranger had seen her, really seen her, in a way that nobody had in so long. And somehow that terrified her more than anything else that had happened in her hard life. The diner had grown quiet around them, the usual late-night crowd thinning out until it was just Sarah, the mysterious customer, and the ghosts of broken dreams floating in the fluorescent light. Sarah should have walked away. Every instinct told her to retreat behind her professional mask and treat him like any other customer. But something about his gentle persistence kept her rooted to the spot. You said you knew someone like me, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the coffee machine. Past tense. The man's eyes clouded with a pain so deep that Sarah felt it in her own chest. My daughter. She had your same fire, your same desire to nurture people through food. She used to say that cooking was just love made visible. 8 years, Sarah replied, already turning to leave. She'd learned not to encourage conversation with customers who seemed too interested. That's a long time, he said softly. You must see a lot of stories come through that door. Sarah paused, caught off guard by something in his tone. More than I'd like to remember, she said, surprising herself with her honesty. The man smiled, and for a moment, Sarah saw something that made her chest tighten. It was the same look her father used to give her when she was little and had scraped her knee. Like he wanted to fix all the hurt in the world, starting with hers. I bet you do, he said, taking a sip of his coffee. I bet you see it all. And as Sarah walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another customer stopping by for a late-night snack. Something about him felt different, important, like he was there for a reason she couldn't quite understand yet. She had no idea that in the next few hours this mysterious stranger would turn her entire world upside down, and that sometimes, just sometimes, angels really do come disguised as customers in expensive coats, carrying secrets that could change everything. What happened next would have seemed impossible to Sarah just hours before. The mysterious customer didn't just eat his pie and leave like everyone else. Instead, he lingered, nursing his coffee with the patience of someone who had nowhere else to be. Or maybe someone who was exactly where he needed to be. When Sarah returned to refill his cup, he did something that caught her completely off guard. He left a $20 tip on a $4 order. Not unusual in itself, but then he looked directly into her eyes and said, "You seem like someone who takes care of people." Sarah's guard went up immediately. Years of disappointment had taught her to be suspicious of unexpected kindness, especially from strangers with expensive watches and perfect manners. "Mom, I finished it," she called out, then stopped when she saw Robert. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had company." "Emma, come here," Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. "I want you to meet someone very important. This is Mr. Chun, the man who made all of this possible." Emma walked over with the confidence of a girl who'd watched her mother transform from defeated to determined, who'd learned that dreams weren't luxuries but necessities, who discovered that miracles were just kindness wearing a different name. "Thank you for giving my mom her life back," Emma said simply, then turned to Sarah. "I made something for the restaurant." She opened her portfolio and revealed a stunning photo collage titled Emma's Kitchen, A Journey of Love. It showed their entire story, pictures of Sarah at culinary school, the empty restaurant space being renovated, opening night, happy customers, and in the center, a photo of Sarah and Robert from that first meeting at the lawyer's office, both of them crying tears of joy. But it was the final image that took everyone's breath away. Emma had somehow found the original photograph of Grace that Robert had shown Sarah that night at the diner, and she'd placed it at the heart of the collage, surrounded by pictures of all the people the foundation had helped. Grace's face smiled out from the center of it all, as if she were watching over the dream she'd started, the legacy she'd never known she would leave. "She's here with us," Emma said softly, looking at Grace's photograph. "Every time someone's life gets changed, every time someone gets a second chance, she's here." Robert stood up slowly, his legs shaky with emotion, and pulled both Sarah and Emma into an embrace that felt like coming home. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me my daughter back." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to him, her heart full of gratitude so deep it felt like it might overflow. "There's always a place for you here," she said, gesturing to the corner booth. The same spot where he'd sat at the diner all those months ago. As Robert settled into his seat, Sarah brought him a cup of coffee and a slice of the restaurant's signature dessert, a chocolate soufflé that never fell, topped with a delicate sugar sculpture that looked like angel wings. "It's Grace's recipe," she said softly. "I found it in one of the culinary books you sent me. I thought she should be part of this place." Robert's composure finally cracked, and tears flowed freely down his weathered cheeks. "She would have loved this," he whispered, looking around at the restaurant that hummed with life and laughter. She would have loved you. That's when Sarah revealed her own surprise. I need to tell you something, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. You asked me to help someone when I succeeded. I've already helped 3 people get into culinary school. But there's something else. She pulled out a folder and placed it in front of him. I've started a foundation. The Grace Chun Foundation for Culinary Dreams. Every month we'll sponsor someone who needs what I needed. A second chance. A belief that their dreams matter. A reminder that food is love made visible. Robert opened the folder with trembling hands. And there on the first page was a photograph of Grace beside the foundation's mission statement. His daughter's dream wasn't just living on through Sarah. It was multiplying, growing, touching lives that would touch other lives in an endless chain of hope and possibility. As Robert sat there, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Sarah had accomplished, the restaurant door chimed one more time. Emma walked in, now 13 and carrying a portfolio under her arm, her face glowing with excitement. Every detail had been planned with love. The warm yellow walls that made everyone feel welcome. The open kitchen where the magic happened in full view. The chalkboard menu that changed based on what ingredients spoke to her that day. Her first customer walked in at exactly 6 p.m. on opening night. He was a young man, maybe 25, with the kind of tired eyes Sarah recognized immediately. He ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a bowl of soup, and when Sarah brought it to his table, she saw his hands shake as he reached for his wallet. "First bowls on the house," she said gently, the words flowing as naturally as breathing. "Welcome to Emma's kitchen." The man looked up at her with surprise and gratitude that nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I haven't eaten a real meal in 3 days." Sarah smiled, feeling Grace's spirit and Robert's love flowing through her hands as she ladled him a second bowl. "That's what we're here for," she said. "Good food and second chances." And in that moment, the circle of kindness that had started with a grieving father's love for his lost daughter began to expand, one meal at a time. As the evening wore on, Emma's kitchen filled with the kind of warm buzz that only happens when people feel truly welcome. Sarah moved through her kitchen like a dancer, every motion purposeful and graceful, creating dishes that tasted like home even to people who'd never had one. Then, at exactly 8:47 p.m., the door chimed and Sarah looked up to see a familiar figure walking through the entrance. Robert Chun stood there in his expensive coat, his silver hair catching the warm light from the restaurant's windows, and his eyes, those kind, patient eyes, were bright with unshed tears. "I hope you don't mind an old man dropping by," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he took in the bustling restaurant, the happy customers, the dream that had finally found its wings. "Mr. Chun," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I think I'm ready to believe in miracles." The silence on the other end was profound, and then she heard something that made her heart soar. The sound of a man crying tears of joy, finally able to honor his daughter's memory through someone who understood that food was just love made visible. "Can you meet me at my lawyer's office this afternoon?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah said, and for the first time in years, that simple word felt like a promise to herself. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of a small storefront with paint-chipped windows and a "for rent" sign that had been there so long it had become part of the neighborhood's landscape. But when she looked at that empty space, she didn't see failure. She saw possibility. The culinary school had been everything she dreamed of and more. For the first time in years, Sarah had felt alive, her hands working with ingredients like they were old friends, her mind buzzing with recipes and techniques, her heart full of the joy she'd forgotten existed. Her instructors said she had a natural gift, an intuitive understanding of flavors that couldn't be taught. But more than that, she'd found herself again. The woman who stayed up until midnight perfecting a sauce, who believed that a perfectly cooked meal could heal heartbreak and celebrate joy, who understood that feeding people was about so much more than just filling their stomachs. Now, as she inserted the key into the lock of what would become Emma's kitchen, Sarah felt Robert's presence beside her even though he wasn't there. He'd kept his distance during her schooling, sending occasional encouraging notes but never interfering, never making her feel like she owed him anything more than the promise she'd made. The restaurant was small, just 12 tables and a counter where people could watch her cook, but it was perfect. Sarah picked up the business card with shaking hands. It was simple, elegant. Robert Chun Foundation for Second Chances, followed by a phone number and an address in the expensive part of town. The foundation's motto was printed in small script at the bottom, "Where dreams find their wings." She stared at those words until they blurred through her tears. Grace's dreams finding their wings through someone else. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and completely impossible, except for the $500 still clutched in her other hand that proved it wasn't impossible at all. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the business card propped against the salt shaker, the money spread out like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't solve. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Robert's patient face, heard his daughter's story, felt the weight of possibility pressing against her chest like a physical thing. At 6 in the morning, Emma found her there, still in her diner uniform, surrounded by the evidence of a night that had changed everything. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked, her 12-year-old voice thick with sleep and worry. Sarah looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw herself at that age, full of dreams and certainty that the world was a place where good things happened to good people. When had she stopped believing that? When had she taught Emma, through her own defeated silences, that dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford? "Baby," Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion, "what if I told you that sometimes miracles really do happen?" Emma's eyes widened, and Sarah saw a flicker of the hope she'd been trying to protect her daughter from. What kind of miracle? Instead of answering, Sarah picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed the number on the card. It rang once, twice, and then Robert's gentle voice filled the silence. "Sarah? I was hoping you'd call." With trembling fingers, Sarah picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was $500 in crisp $20 bills and a note written on heavy paper that felt expensive between her fingers. "For your car repairs. No strings attached. You deserve to get home safely to your daughter. Arcee." Sarah's knees buckled. She sank into the booth where Robert had been sitting, the money spread across the table like evidence of a miracle she couldn't quite believe. $500. Enough to fix her car, enough to stop holding her breath every time she turned the key, enough to stop worrying about breaking down on the way to pick up Emma from school. But it was the note that undid her completely. No strings attached. He wasn't trying to manipulate her or buy her trust. He was simply doing what Grace would have done, seeing someone in need and responding with immediate practical kindness. Sarah buried her face in her hands and sobbed. All the tears she'd been holding back for years poured out of her in great shuddering waves. She cried for her lost dreams, for her daughter who deserved better, for the woman she used to be before life beat her down into someone who couldn't even accept a gift without assuming it was a trap. When she finally looked up, she saw something that made her heart stop. Robert was standing in the parking lot beside a sleek black sedan, not moving, not getting into his car, just waiting. Even from this distance, she could see his patient silhouette against the streetlight, and she knew with absolute certainty that he would stand there all night if necessary. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed the money and ran outside, her footsteps echoing across the empty asphalt. But when she reached the parking lot, he was gone. The only evidence he'd ever been there was a business card lying on the ground where he'd stood, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixing with the night air. Somewhere between Emma's birth and David's departure, between the mounting bills and the endless shifts, that part of herself had withered away like a plant forgotten in a dark corner. She remembered the last time Emma had asked her about cooking. It was 6 months ago, during a particularly tough week when they'd been living on cereal and sandwiches. "Mom, why don't you cook anymore? I remember when you used to make that amazing chicken with the crispy skin, and those cookies that smelled like Christmas." Sarah had brushed off the question with practiced efficiency. "No time, baby. Maybe someday." But the look in Emma's eyes, disappointment mixed with a sadness too old for a 12-year-old, had haunted her for weeks. What if Robert was right? What if she wasn't nobody special? What if she was exactly who Grace would have wanted her father to find? The thought sent a shiver through her entire body, equal parts terror and electricity. Behind her, she heard the gentle scrape of Robert's chair as he stood up. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was he leaving? Was she about to let this miracle walk out of her life because she was too scared to believe in miracles? "Sarah," he said softly, and she could hear the understanding in his voice. "I'm going to leave something for you. You don't have to decide tonight." Sarah heard the rustle of paper, the soft thud of something being placed on the table, and then the gentle chime of the doorbell as Robert stepped out into the cold October night. For a long moment, she stood frozen at the counter, her reflection staring back at her from the coffee machine like a stranger she wasn't sure she wanted to know. When she finally turned around, the booth was empty except for a small white envelope sitting next to his untouched pie. Her name was written across the front in careful, elegant handwriting that spoke of old-world manners and patient attention to detail.